Next on TSW tonight, some of our airmen are no longer missing.
Why so worried, Robert?
It's about my checkup.
Next stop, the dentist.
How many fillings last time?
Well, only one.
Oh, better than most, but even one isn't good enough. What you need is Colgate. Tastes nice. And what Colgate and every mum really wants is 0 fillings. We hope that will happen one day. But meanwhile, Colgate's always been one of the most effective toothpaste against fillings. And now, since they've introduced a new Colgate with an advanced fluoride system for even fewer fillings, it's even better.
That's what I want.
0 fillings. And no other toothpaste comes closer.
Nobody's working harder than Colgate for 0 fillings.
In 1825, they said man would suffocate at speeds in excess of 20 miles per hour. In 1853, they said painting was dead. In 1900, it was declared that man would never fly. In 1954, lots of people still wondered if a man could run a mile in 4 minutes. And in 1963, they said that coal was a fuel of the past. How wrong they were. Never has there been a better time to choose coal, the fuel of the future.
I've got you under my skin.
The new Fiat Superstrada. Inside, it's been restyled with a new dashboard and electronic check panel. Yet outside, the shape is the same, because the Strada's unique design gives more passenger space. How much more? Well, enough to fit our biggest rival, the Ford Escort, inside.
I've got you under my skin.
Yet it still costs £694 less than the Escort. The new Fiat Superstrada. More space, less money.
There are 2,000 miles for you to explore on a whole season's boating holiday. The Thames, Broads and canals of Britain are much as they were 200 years ago. Call us now for your free whole season's brochure and see the unspoilt side of Britain.
Sleep Easy's pocketed springs move like the keys of a piano, individually. They respond to your every movement, so they're always in tune with your body. Whoever you are, Sleep Easy, a little night music.
Leo McCann is the narrator of our next program this evening. Some of our airmen are no longer missing.
In the early hours of this morning, RAF Bomber Command launched a major raid on Berlin. Of the 596 aircraft which took part in the raid, 46 are missing.
The Nazis entered this war under the rather childish delusion that they were going to bomb everybody else and nobody was going to bomb them. At Rotterdam, London, Warsaw, and 100 other places, they put that rather naive theory into operation. They sowed the wind, and now they are going to reap the whirlwind.
They fell like crippled birds from Holland's limited skies. Nearly 7,000 aircraft, Allied and German, more than lost anywhere else in the European war. Geography dictated their path over Holland. The Germans waited with guns and fighter pilots. They met, they fought desperately. Losses were tragic, but the Allies kept coming by day and night. Those who crashed on land were the known statistics of war. Of those 7,000, it is estimated that hundreds more disappeared below the icy waters of Holland's inland sea, the IJsselmeer. The fate of their airmen held secret for years, a laconic missing, their only requiem. RAF night bombers were ordered to fly direct to Germany over Holland. 3,000 fell as the Nazis met them with their best fighter squadrons and long-range guns. To hit Germany by day, the Americans chose the same route. Few thought they could succeed. Among them, Air Chief Marshal Bomber Harris.
I was very doubtful, after our experiences, that the bomber would get through in daylight. They had heavier machine guns than we had. We, for some reason or other, always had nothing but 303. Well, it's rather like a pea shooter against an elephant. A 303 against an armored fighter.
The concept of hitting them round the clock with daylight and night raids was sound. The problem was that in the early days, we did not have enough bombers and we did not have enough fighters to make deep penetrations into Germany without prohibitive losses. The only thing that I could recommend would be to have learned our job a little more slowly and waited a little longer before making the very deep and very damaging penetrations.
The Americans directed thousands of heavily armored bombers across Holland and added squadrons of escort fighters. The Nazi operations centers had one order: bring them down before they reach Germany. Permanently on the alert, the gunners prepared for yet another battle. Pilots of Germany's fastest fighters, the Fokker-Wulf 190, roared into the sky, while tons of exploding shells sought the Americans high above the IJsselmeer. When the ack stopped, the fighter planes took over. As desperate dogfights succeeded or failed, the bombers fired non-stop at the enemy. "2,000 day and night fighters, piloted by the cream of the Luftwaffe, were shot down over Holland. For the Nazi Air Force, it was the beginning of the end. A decimation, a disaster. Both sides paid heavily as plane after plane disintegrated in the air, crashed to destruction, or plunged anonymously into the IJsselmeer. For many who parachuted to safety, the Germans were waiting.
dangerous? Is it painful?
No, it's not painful.
Your name is Philip J. Gibbons.
Yes, sir.
Gibbons, are you wounded?
Twisted ankle.
Twisted ankle, but that's all. You can walk after all.
Yes.
The responsibility of trying to prevent Allied aircraft penetrating beyond occupied Holland fell to General of the Luftwaffe fighter squadrons, Adolf Galland. Galland, who personally shot down over 100 Allied aircraft, recalls the days and nights of desperation.
They began with very small formation. And, they had many losses for the time being. And then they came with fighter escort by Thunderbolts and Lightnings. And from this time on, we were not able to intercept the American formation as soon as possible. We had to take our fighter force back and to concentrate more fighters at a longer distance from the coastline. But nevertheless, on the way back, there were attacks at least up to the coastline. And therefore, many losses are over Holland.
Holland's main airport. Where runways stretch today, old sailing ships were often wrecked. This was once a treacherous stretch of water which earned the name the airport bears today, Schiphol, ship's grave. Though totally destroyed during World War II, it has become one of Europe's busiest airports. Each day, about 500 aircraft arrive and depart through friendly skies. During the days and nights of war, many more Allied and German warplanes battled desperately overhead. The steady beat from massed bombers, the whine of attacking and defending fighter planes, the rain of molten metal, the fiery explosions in the sky. Back at their English bases, American bombers which were hit but did not fall unloaded their wounded and their dead. On the wall of missing at Margraten, near the Dutch-German border, are etched the names of 1,200 American airmen who disappeared without trace over Holland, a sacred tribute to the men who brought liberation. Another wall of missing at England's Runnymede adds some 20,000 British and Commonwealth air crews to the list of those whose fate remains unknown. In 1960, Holland returned to another war that began centuries ago, reclaiming land for farms, villages, and cities by building dikes and pumping out the water. Meter by laborious meter, retaining walls come together. Water levels gradually dropped, revealing the sea bottom with its archaeological treasures until Holland had won another battle in its continuous fight against too much water and too little land. But all wars claim their victims, the fish and the fishermen who for centuries harvested the rich waters. As the sea and its inhabitants vanished, nature moved in. Man helped by aerial fertilization and the seeding of rushes which soak up excess water from the new land. Before the new soil can be made ready for cultivation, bombs and shells from air battles fought and long forgotten, and still potentially lethal, had to be removed. As the former seabed became solid enough to support man, Gerrit Zwanenberg, chief of the Dutch Air Force recovery team, went to the site of an aircraft wreck. This was the final resting place of an American B-17, which for more than 30 years had lain beneath the waters of the IJsselmeer. Zwanenberg looks for personal items which may reveal the identity of the crew and the aircraft they flew. Here could lie the answers relatives have sought for years.
First thing you do is establish the type of aircraft, and just a tiny piece like this might be enough, because you see there is a part number on it, 129, and the 29 stands for short 29, meaning the short Sterling. Also on it is a small factory inspection stamp, and it says here SHB, meaning short and Harlet and Belfast. So this tiny piece tells me that this is a Sterling which was built by Short and Harlet and Belfast, meaning again that I can forget all those Sterlings which have been built in Rochester or by the Austin factories. You see, it's a process of elimination. Then what you do is look at the ammunition, and this one is from 1942, because on every shell there is the year stamped in. This is a great help because we know from experience that, for instance, ammunition from 1942 has been used from July 1942 up to June 1943. So this gives you the time you have to look for where the aircraft came down. This was a lucky thing again. In actual fact, this was the first aircraft I ever recovered in 1962. And I had found it was a Lancaster from the Royal Air Force. And from my files, I knew she had to come down on the 20th of December 1942. And that aircraft was an aircraft from 97 Squadron. And then I was looking, see, this is part of one of those incendiary bomb containers, and some squadrons had the habit of painting on the equipment of the squadron code letters. And this is OF, and these were the code letters of 97 Squadron. So that was a positive identification. This is again a lucky shot. You see, this was from a Heinkel 115, which was a German float plane, and they were used from Amsterdam seaplane base during the war. And I knew it was a Heinkel 115 float plane from the bits and pieces. You see, I found the floats and several other things indicating to me that it was a Heinkel 115. And then I was lucky finding this number plate, because on this number plate it says here 2218. And that is what the British and Americans would call a seal number. The Germans would call it a Werke number. And only one aircraft has this specific number. See, so when I found this little number plate, I knew exactly which particular aircraft it was.
Life on undrained areas of the IJsselmeer continues as it has for centuries. Commercial fishing is still the main activity. In these areas, fishermen often release a snag net to find in its folds a piece of twisted metal. Another missing aircraft is below. Lazy windmills still pump water from the land, driving it along canals through this low, flat country which nature could not drain. The massive Barrier Dam, 30 kilometers long and 90 meters wide, holds back the hungry waters of the North Sea. It is one of Europe's great engineering feats, a tribute to the hard-working dedication of the Dutch to making their small country larger. On the 22nd of December 1943, an American B-24 bomber left its base at Shipton, England. It flew to Münster and dropped its bombs. It was hit by ground fire on the way back and plunged into the Issel. The B-24's wreckage was discovered in 1968, but its recovery could not be planned until 1975. Jerry Swanenberg's first task was to wade out to the wreck to seek its identity.
I went there and I found that she was built by Ford. I also found that the markings on the aircraft were outlined in red. And that red outline only appeared on American aircraft in the second half of 1943. So that again gave you a rough indication. Later on, I went back and I found the main dinghy, and on the main dinghy I found the serial number of the aircraft. And that checked out with all the information I already had. She was a Ford-built aircraft, and she came down in December 1943.
As the wreck was in shallow waters 1,200 meters from the shore, the Dutch Air Force recovery team and the Army engineers built a raised road over the water to where it lay. The Air Force recovery team would soon learn that of the 10 crew who flew the aircraft's last mission, 5 died trapped inside, 4 parachuted to their deaths, and 1 man survived. The dedicated recovery work on this one plane took 4 months of constant labor. Holding back the water with a coffer dam, piece by piece they brought the bomber's tragic history to light. Working in cold and difficult conditions, they pulled from the wreckage objects that would lead to definite identification. The first, a parachute.
Kijk eens, compleet.
Met loodparachute.
And then the remains of those no longer missing, of the 5 who died with their aircraft, eventually to be returned for burial in America at the request of their kin.
Even uitkijken voor hem. Ja, daar we ook beginnen. Die kant verloren. Mooi, ik heb niet gespannen. Ja, dat lag allemaal in de boot. Ja, de boot ligt nou daar.
Miraculously, 1 man of the 10 aboard survived the crash. He was the co-pilot, Charles Taylor. Charles, the lucky one, returns to the scene for the first time since the crash and recalls what happened after his plane was hit by Akak.
We were losing the oil pressure in number 4 engine, so we had to feather that. And we had lost the prop governor on number 3 engine, so we couldn't get much power out of that. And this one, let's see, something else happened. We lost the supercharger on this one, so we couldn't get any pressure up in the manifold to keep this one working. So we're really flying on about 1 engine. And I guess we got down to about 110 when we finally hit the water. We didn't lower the landing gear. We didn't lower the, I don't remember lowering the flaps. We may have. But we got it down as slow as we could before it hit the water. Then it immediately stopped, filled with water, and then as soon as I got out of the plane, I swam away because I expected it to sink. I expected to be pulled down. And the plane just stayed there and stayed there, so then I went back up on the wing. Then I got up on the top, and I thought I would get out the life raft. Meanwhile, the brain is not working too well. No. It was kind of cold. So I did get the life raft out, but I didn't have any strength to get in it, so all I did was put my arm over it. And then I passed out, and then the Germans picked me up.
For Charles Taylor, the only survivor, an emotional reunion with a machine that brought him face to face with death that December day in 1943.
Oh, it is a bit battered, isn't it? Yes.
It's that better, Charlie.
Yes. Oh, boy. I didn't think it would be in the soil this much, but it's pretty badly beaten up. Oh, boy. Never expected that.
You're a very lucky man.
Yes, yes, indeed. 1 out of 10, really. 1 out of 10. Unbelievable.
See, this is here the
top turret.
Top turret.
Yes. There was a hatch.
The hatch.
Got up, yes. Part of the pilot's compartment. Yes.
Every relic had to be carefully removed, washed, and identified. Years of immersion could render unstable bombs, cartridges, or pressurized tanks.
So we hit pretty fast, so I could see why it would buckle like that. Because the water is not so soft.
It's like a brake wall at 110 miles an hour.
That's right, it really was. Yes.
Thoughts of his friends, of what the war meant and why he alone should be alive, move with Charles Taylor along the road from the wreck.
"50 years of Mars goodness, and now we bring you the biggest Mars bar ever. Even more milk, more glucose, more sugar, and more thick, thick chocolate in a bar that's bigger than ever before. Tremendous value, really satisfying. The biggest Mars bar ever."
Now there's Ultra Bright to get you noticed. Take Cindy. For 3 weeks, Cindy had flown with Captain Jim Sinclair, but Jim thought Cindy was strictly coffee, tea, or milk. Then Cindy discovered Ultra Bright. It made her smile dynamite white, dynamite fresh. It got her noticed. That night, Cindy and Jim took off together. Her feet haven't touched the ground since. Fly Ultra Bright for a smile so ultra white it gets you noticed.
Look alive, Gray, did you hear?
You'll never grow a relaxed tea bush by shouting at it. And without relaxed bushes, we wouldn't get the relaxing flavor of Thai Fu. Our bushes are warmed by the sunshine as you warm the pot. They get just the right amount of fresh water, and then they stand till perfect. In fact, they're grown just the way you make a pot of tea. Relaxing Thai Fu, because that's how it grew.
It's Madeley's £1 million winter sale with these great introductory offers. This hollow fibre polyester fill continental quilt is just $19.95 for the double size, with singles at only $15.95. And with every single size dolly mixture quilt cover you buy at $14.99, we'll give you this matching pillowcase absolutely free. Buy the double size at $19.99 and you'll get 2 free. Choose from 3 designs, but hurry, they're only at Madeley's at these prices while stocks last.
If you like a bit of this and quite a lot of that, enjoy a touch of boom, and we'll show you where it's at. Buckland's makes it fun. Buckland's is the one. Buckland's let you know that your holiday's begun. We'll give you you can do and it's true that everything's free. If you like a touch of this and quite a lot of that, take a Buckland's holiday for lots of this and that.
Get the brochure now.
The morning is freezing cold, just as it was in February 1941. In the second car is John Hall, sergeant gunner in the rear of a Wellington bomber, which crashed in that month on the ice-covered Isselmere. Injured, he was pulled by his mates from the wrecked plane and dragged on a parachute across the ice, captured and imprisoned. A dead comrade remained in the plane. For John Hall, this was also his first return to the site of this crash. Once water and ice covered, now farming land.
Well, this is the spot where we found your aircraft in October 1967.
Oh, that's...
And you see, it's quite a different scenery from the time you came down.
Yes, it certainly is. How thick would the ice be?
Well, it was quite a severe winter in 1940, 1941. I think it should have been 13, 14.
I told Mr. Swanenberg the other night. He brought me a great deal of consolation. Although our crewmate was killed, there's always that feeling you want to get them out. And we couldn't, and it was depressing. That was my main thought, actually, and I'm sure it was of the others, but we didn't speak of it.
But you were out in time.
Just about.
Well, I said I would give you something.
Well.
And this is one of the shells you shot.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I hope you like it, and
yes,
keep it as a memento.
I'll treasure this.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Mrs. Swanberg.
My pleasure.
One of the shells. I'm not crying, it's just this...
No, it's the wind, I understand that.
Well,
all right.
Say so.
Well, I should say I'll wrap it up again because
yes,
it's raining a little bit.
Yes, I'll treasure that.
The humane work of the Dutch Air Force continues as fragments of personal belongings and lost aircraft are sifted for identifying clues. Much of the equipment, such as this pilot seat, is intact and in remarkably good condition after years underwater.
Well, it doesn't surprise us anymore, and sometimes I would like that today's equipment would be as good as that. You see, this here is, well, a pre-war parachute hook. I just cleaned the mud off, and it's as shiny as ever. But just a very normal thing like a cable clamp. We got this from that B-24, and you see it still works. I mean, it has been under the water for some 30 years and still going. In that Sterling, we found the oil and the prop gear because the feathering of the prop was done with oil pressure. And, well, as you see, it's still perfect. I had it analyzed in Britain, and they told me that it still stood up to the specification in 1943, and that after, well, she went in 1943 and recovered her in 1972, so it's remarkable, isn't it? Personal effects recognized by the family as have belonged to their fiancé, son, what's your name? For instance, here I have a watch. Well, no, you might say, why didn't you get that one back? But this was duty issue. This was not a personal one. But from the same person, we found his pilot's ring. And that one definitely went back because that was a personal thing. Here, sunglasses, which the normal type issued during the war. And I found those sunglasses together with those gloves. And, well, for me, that's an indication it's not just an aircraft, but man inside. One of the things I have to do is when we find an aircraft, and we know that people are missing, I have to look at those specific aircraft parts which are found in the neighborhood of a person. When we find this, it's a harness lock. This is carried on the man. They put on a harness when they get into the aircraft, and they only put it off when they come back to base. So when you find this particular thing, it's a 100% indication that you have to find a man as well. And when we find a man, one of my tasks is to see which bits and pieces of the aircraft are found with the man. For instance, this here is a rudder pedal of a Sterling, indicating that you're in the cockpit area.
Personal belongings of those who died so long ago are reverently removed. A comb, which might carry scratched initials. These overshoes a pilot once wore against the high-altitude cold. And perhaps inside this helmet being carefully washed could be the name of the wearer or his squadron. The Dutch investigators eventually learned that the pilot of the B-24 had been Flying Officer Kent Miller of Huntington, West Virginia. His brother, Eugene, remembers the day he was told that Kent had been found.
Well, yes, I don't think I'll ever forget the day. I was in my office, and my receptionist said that an Army major wanted to see me, and being the type of fellow I am, I said, well, tell him I'm too old. I don't want to enlist in the Army. And she told me then it was something personal that she wanted to see me about, and I couldn't realize why an Army major would want to see me at this late date in life. And so when he came in, he was very sober, and then I thought started thinking, and thought it had to be something to do with my brother. And when he told me well, it was a shock, a very definite shock. But after I got my feelings back together, I was very glad to finally find out exactly what did happen. And it was a shock, but I never will forget the day. Never.
While U.S. bombers mass-raided Germany by day, RAF Bomber Command pounded it by night. Throughout World War II, the skies over Holland, day and night, held the balance between two massive objectives. One, the Allies' determination to bomb Germany into submission. The other, the Nazis' grim effort to preserve what they had. More than 3,000 British aircraft, mainly bombers, were shot down on the so-called safe route across Holland.
That was the point of entry into Germany, where the German fighters were under full control in their boxes and by their ground controllers. And that's where they had the sort of first exact knowledge of which way they were coming in and how many were coming.
The Germans were waiting with their night fighters and anti-aircraft guns, prepared for the Allied planes coming and going. The crews of Bomber Command flew in darkness to names on maps illuminated by the pathfinders to drop their bombs. They flew through walls of flak, waiting to be attacked by an enemy they could not see. Nowhere else over Europe were such desperate air battles fought. Some would reach home again, and some would not. Sergeant Brian Bacon was one who did not. He was navigator on a Sterling bomber shot down on May the 13th, 1943. His sister Beryl remembers her reactions when told her brother's remains had finally been found by the Dutch Air Force.
Well, it was a stunned silence at first, quite honestly, but after that, I was very relieved. I can't say I was happy, that's not the word I want, but I was pleased that at last he had got a resting place. We knew where he was, and we knew that he'd obviously died instantaneously and that he hadn't suffered, he hadn't been a prisoner, he hadn't wandered the countryside even, you know.
In a ceremony unique in the world, the Dutch of Dronten pay yearly tribute to air crews who died for their country's eventual liberation. The Dutch Air Force will find more wrecked aircraft in the archaeological mud once covered by water. More of those who died on duty will be named. The qualification implied by the word missing will end, and many people in many countries will have the knowledge they sought for so many years. Still sad, but without the doubts of the unknown.
Missing. You know, it's a very vague, horrible word. From the point of view of your family, it's worse than being dead, I would say.
You hardly ever saw anybody die, unless somebody in your own crew was killed. It was just a face there in the morning, eating breakfast with you, and in the evening he's not there. And of course, Bomber Command was so efficient that if you lost 3 or 4 crews off your squadron, you got back at 6 o'clock in the morning, you went to bed. When you got up at lunchtime and went in the mess, replacements were there.
Karl-Heinz Villiers was a German fighter pilot ace with 54 kills on his record. He was killed too on April the 8th, 1944, while leading an attack on American B-24s. Lieutenant Schild, who was flying with him in another German fighter plane, recalls the day of his death.
When having reached the Zuider Sea, we saw the first bomber formations and started our attack. There were approximate 36 US aircraft with a considerable fighter escort. Charlie shot a Liberator down, and after the attack, we flew over the unit off into the sun. The Thunderbolt attacked Charlie and was shooting with all guns. I saw several parts of his aircraft flying all over and a long and big gas drive behind him. The craft crashed in the banks of the Zuider Sea.
It was 23 years before his wife Lisette finally learned the truth.
Erst habe ich nicht sagen können. At first, I didn't believe it. I had a good idea of what had happened to him because the German Air Force told me on 8th of April 1944 he hadn't returned. I didn't really believe them because he always told me he would manage to survive. Over the years, I had so often written to try and find him and where he fell. When the Dutch Air Force told me they'd found a Vockerfeld that crashed on 8th of April 1944 and identified Charlie, then I believed it.
Carl Willius was buried by the Dutch at Isselstein Cemetery outside Nijmegen. In this cemetery lie more than 35,000 Germans killed in action. For the commanders who led them, their death was a reality they lived with.
It was, of course, the biggest problem and the biggest load, psychological load. I personally lost two brothers. One in the British Channel, a very young one, and the other in the area of Liège. So I know exactly the feeling, and in my quality as wing commander, responsible for 120 fighters, I had every week a funeral. And I must say, it is even much better to have the body and to bury the body than to be in a position not knowing what happens with this man.
On British airfields, they counted the bombers as they returned. Some unscathed, others with wings or tails shot away. And inside many, the dead, the wounded, and the shocked. It was just another day, another mission.
Any commander is distressed by losses, but of course in any war, losses are bound to happen. And the heavier they are, the more the commanders concerned are distressed by them. But there's little that one can do about it.
One felt that he was almost usurping deific prerogatives because you sent men in to die. You knew from actuarial experience about how many would die on each mission. There were some differences, of course. You couldn't say who, but you could say after a while, with almost surety, how many. And you had to equate that against the damage done and the extent to which it had shortened the war.
The search goes on. Dutch Air Force survey teams moved through the newly drained land, seeking the twisted wreckage of lost aircraft and the men who flew them. Forgotten victims of a war that lasted too long and claimed too many lives. Of the 150 planes recovered so far by the Dutch Air Force, 60 shattered Allied and German aircraft have been found in the Isselmeer area. How many remain?
Well, we might find a few, but compared to those many missing, it's only a fair little bit. Because you see, quite a lot of those missing aircrew, they came down in the North Sea. And the North Sea is very deep, it will not be drained, and it's really impossible to recover any aircraft from there. So we might find a few, and I sincerely hope we will do, but not all that many, I'm sorry to say.
Charles Taylor and his wife pay a final tribute to friends lost in war. But what does the Dutch Air Force recovery work mean to families and friends who have clung to hope for so many years?
The work that is being done by the Royal Dutch Air Force and the fact that they are finding these people, this is giving a greater peace of mind to their relatives who have wondered for 30-odd years whatever happened to them.
I don't think it matters where a person dies, particularly, but I think it's nice to know where it happened and not to be left vaguely wondering whether there's some remote miracle that he might be alive somewhere.
It's gratifying to know that what did happen. And I think it's better to have them home and know where they are. And I was very pleased to be able to bury my brother alongside of my mother and father. And that was very gratifying to be able to bring him home where he belonged.